Hey everyone, my name is Ansh. I lead education here at the Fremont Debate Academy, and today I'm going to be talking about how to give the second speech. By the end of this video, you'll know how to give both the Proposition 2 and the Opposition 2 speeches. So let's get right into it. In this comic, you see two hippos playing a friendly game of tug of war. And that's exactly what debate is. It's a friendly game of tug or debate between two sides. That's not to say that debaters are hippos though. But basically, a lot of this tugging and refuting or debating happens between the second speakers because they're responsible for a large chunk of the refuting or responding to the opponent's contentions within a debate round. So let's get right into how to give the second speech. The first part is to introduce yourself. And you always want to start off with an introduction. This is for any speech, let alone just a second speech. It's optional to have a hook. Having a hook is really just up to how much time you have within your speech. If you have a lot to get through, you may want to skip out on the hook. But in your introduction, you always want to make sure to include your name, speaker position, topic, and what side you are. This just makes it clear to the judge who you are and what you're going to be saying within your speech. You also want to have an outline. This is especially useful for second speeches because second speakers usually have a lot of material to get through within their speech. So an outline can not only keep everybody in the round engaged and knowing what you're going to be bringing up, it can also help you as the speaker stay on topic and make sure that you hit every single one of the things that you outline within your outline. So after you've given your introduction, you want to go right into the background. Specifically, you want to resolve any issues with the background or the definitions within the debate. It's really important to do this before addressing any contentions so that the context is correct for the debate round. Remember that context and background is really the foundation of the entire debate round and any of the arguments that are built on top of it. So making sure that that's correct or accurate is important and something that you want to do before you go on to anything else. It's worth mentioning that you only have to address the background or definitions for a few debate rounds, because in the majority of your debate rounds, you're not actually going to have disagreements on the background or the definitions. So generally, this part can be skipped. Next, let's go right into refuting. So what is refuting? Refuting is directly responding to the new contentions brought up by the opponents in their previous speech. Why should we do this first? Well, the opponent's contentions are really fresh in the judge's mind, so you want to address them and respond to them as soon as you can. Also, directly responding or refuting the opponent's contentions makes it a lot easier for the judge to compare the two sides and weigh them against one another and choose yours. Now let's go on to how to refute. The first part of refuting, and it's really important, even though it seems simple, is to identify the argument that you want to refute. This can be a really small part of one contention, or it can be a broader idea that encapsulates many different contentions. Whatever it is, you want to be very specific on what you're refuting so that everybody is on the same page about what you're refuting, and the judge specifically knows exactly what you're saying and where you're saying it. So when you start thinking about how to refute, you want to think about what's illogical in the opponent's contention, what's contradictory in the opponent's contention, or what harm will happen because of their argument. And if you don't know where to start, we recommend that you go down the A areas plus I list and you really respond to each and every component of that structure, and that'll give you more of an idea of where the weaknesses lie in the opponent's contention. You can also compare your contentions with the opponent's contention and explain why your contentions make more sense than theirs if you're really stuck on how to start refuting. Now let's go into some tips to help you refute, because refuting is definitely hard, and let's go into it. So you want to respond to the contentions in the order that the contentions were presented in. This is really important because having a consistent order throughout the debate round makes sure that everybody knows what you're talking about and where you're talking about it. It's also generally just easier to follow along with. You also want to be very clear with what argument you're going to refute before you start to refute it. Because if you give a really good refute, but nobody knows what it's actually in refute to, it's as good as you didn't give that refute in the first place. Nobody knows where it is or what it's in response to, so nobody's going to write that down. Probably the most important tip that we can give you is to always relax and think logically. And these two go together. If you're not relaxed, you probably won't be able to think logically. Remember that every single argument has a pro and con, no matter how indestructible it might seem to you in the heat of the moment. You just have to go out there and find that pro or con of that argument. your approach to refuting will vary based on the debate round that you're in and based on the types of arguments that are brought up in that debate round. So for example, if your opponents bring up a lot of small contentions, like 5 or 6 of them that are all really similar, what you can do is you can group your refutes to those arguments and refute all of them with like common refutes. So you don't have to go and respond to each one of them individually. That might take up too much of your time. On the other hand, if your opponents only have a few really long contentions, you can spend a longer amount of time responding to each and every one of their contentions, specifically going down the different parts of the ARESI structure. Third, you're going to counter-refute. So let's go into what that is. Counter-refuting is giving a refute to your opponent's refute on your contention. That sounds pretty confusing, so let's give an example. You are the second proposition speaker, and opposition 1 refuted proposition 1, who's your teammate's contentions. So that's also your contention. You will now respond to those refutes to make sure that your contention still stands. Why is this important, you might ask? Well, counter-refuting is really important because it strengthens your arguments by making sure that they're still valid in the judge's point of view. So one analogy that we've used throughout these videos is the skyscraper analogy, right? You want to build up your skyscraper to be really tall, and that skyscraper represents your case. It's constructed based off of the different contentions that you run in the debate round. If you don't counter-refute, it's the equivalent of letting the opponents break down your skyscraper. You don't want to do that, so you want to make sure to refute those refutes to make sure that your skyscraper still stands. What are some tips to counter-refute? So in general, the same tips that you're going to apply to refuting apply to counter-refuting. You want to make sure to stay relaxed, respond logically, and be very specific about what refute you are refuting. It's also important to counter-refute, and one really important tip is to clarify misunderstandings that the opponents make in refuting your argument. Oftentimes when the opponents try to refute your contention, they're going to try to misrepresent things or vary things a little bit from the ways that you said it. And when you're refuting these refutes, you want to make sure that you point these out. You want to let the judge know that the opponents are not understanding your contention properly. And you want to clarify the misunderstandings that they bring up so that the argument is still very clear in the judge's mind and so that you're able to build off of what was said. This goes a long way towards making sure that your skyscraper is still standing tall. Fourthly, you want to bring up about 1 to 3 contentions even as a second speaker. You might be thinking, well, hey, refuting is the most important job of the second speech. Why do they still have to build a case? Remember that the second speech is still considered a constructive speech, which means that they still have to do their part of constructing the case, and they need to bring up contentions. So you want to add 1 to 3 contentions onto your case to continue strengthening your side. And the number of contentions that you bring up really depends on how much time you have left in the debate, in your speech. But you always want to leave time for at least 1 new contention. And that's why we recommend that you bring up your best or strongest contentions earlier on in the debate round. You usually want to have your first speakers bring up all of the best contentions that you have. And this is because second speakers might not have enough time to do justice to those really good contentions if they're running short on time at the end of their speech and they have to bring up this contention. Fifth, we're going to go into time management for second speeches. You obviously have a lot to get through in the second speech, so let's show you how you can break that down and really give enough time to each of those components. So this one slide summary really encapsulates and summarizes what we've covered in the presentation. You want to start off with an introduction where the first 30 seconds are spent on introducing yourself, giving an outline, and maybe even a hook if you have time for that. Then you want to go into refuting, which again is fully responding to the opponent's case and spend 1 to 2 minutes on this. Then you want to go into counter-refuting, which is again strengthening your case by refuting what the opponent said about your contentions and spend 1 to 1.5 minutes on this. Lastly, you want to bring up new arguments, spend 1 to 2 minutes on this, and the number of arguments you bring up, the number of contentions you bring up depends on how much time you have left, but ideally you want to fill up the remaining time with contentions. And that's it. That was the easy part. Now you know how to give the second speech. Now for the hard part, you have to go and do those practice debates to get better at it. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments of this video and we'll get to them as soon as possible. Thanks for watching and happy debating, everyone.